Meeting. Thanks everyone for coming. And we'll go through the agenda. Agenda item 1 is notice of recording stroke webcast. Can I remind members that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press or public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Agenda item 2 is apologies, and are there any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Khan, Councillor Wood and Councillor Langford.
Thank you. And agenda item 3 is declaration of interest. Can I remind members that anybody has any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest, it's better to declare it. Anybody? No. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is action notes and action tracker. To agree the action notes of the meetings held on 10th of November 2022 and 29th of November 2022, and to note action tracker. And from action tracker update, action from 10th of November, performance monitoring, right to buy rules were emailed to members on 8th of December. I believe everybody would have got them. Thank you. Is there any questions about action notes or action tracker? Realities. And we got cabinet members, Councillor John Cotton, to highlight his priorities for 2022-23 for his portfolio. Up to you, John.
Thanks, Chair, and afternoon, colleagues. This is now quite a wide-ranging portfolio. I think in addition to this committee, it reports into 2 other scrutiny committees as well. I'm assuming that's why Ken Wood sent apologies, because he just got fed up with seeing me at the other committees recently. What this report sets out is the areas that are directly relevant to the remit of this committee. So that falls into 2 areas broadly: community safety and also the services around bereavement and the register office. So I'm joined by officers who lead on both those areas. So Sir Julian Nasser, who leads on bereavement and register office matters, and then Wakar Ahmed and Pam Paris from community safety. Also like to welcome Chief Superintendent Matt Sher, who's the Vice Chair of the Birmingham Community Safety Partnership, which I chair. And Matt's also here to help cover the second item this afternoon, which is the annual report of the Community Safety Partnership. So there's a bit of crossover, I think, in terms of the 2 items we'll be discussing today. Just to really summarise in terms of the portfolio priorities item, firstly on community safety, and you'll see we've set out a range of priorities that we're looking to take forward over the course of this year. Our approach is essentially twofold. One, to ensure that we've got a response and support available when community safety incidents occur, but also to ensure that we're focusing properly on prevention and stopping problems from happening in the first place. So it's about targeting and tackling causes as well as responding to specific incidents or concerns. That preventative approach underpins several of the priority areas set out in this report. So, for instance, the preparation for the implementing the serious violence duty. That picks up on the fact that we're investing directly in tackling youth violence, taking very much a public health approach to violence reduction in the city. Again, preventative approach underpins what we're doing around domestic abuse prevention and the developing of our violence against women and girls strategy, which focus rightly on the support and justice for victims, but also on tackling and taking on those underlying causes, challenging social attitudes, changing employer behaviours, changing how the wider health and welfare and justice systems work as well. And of course, some of that came up in that very good debate I think we had at full council last week. It's a very similar approach that we take into the review of our hate crime strategy. So whilst we're strengthening the reporting routes and ensuring there's a robust accountability across all agencies around hate crime, we also need to focus on how we're cutting off the roots of hate as well. those of you were at the Tackling Islamophobia event that was organised, that was a point that was made really strongly there, but it also, of course, applies to all other forms of hatred. And we continue to work with a whole range of partners on this, including with regard to the LGBT plus communities, our Proud Rainbow City Partnership, and external organisations like Tell Mama, amongst others. This report also sets out some of the immediate actions and reactive steps that we take in response to problems. Much of the detail of that is also contained in the following reports, annual reports of the Community Safety Partnership. But the key priorities for the coming year are how we look to increase our redeployable CCTV available to target crime and ASB hotspots, how we strengthen our local working. We know that local and neighbourhood working is really key to tackling many of these issues. So how we're looking at options for more neighbourhood-based solutions, drawing on some of the work that's coming out of those joint pilots that are referenced, that we undertaken with the police in Sparkbrook and Lascelles, and also looking at how the local partnership delivery groups work. And I know some of you will be involved directly in those activities. And then we'll just move on to briefly just touch on bereavement services and the registry office. Again, this is an incredibly important and sensitive area of service. My priority, as some of you have heard me say before, is to ensure that we've got a service that's really important. I'd also like just to put on record my thanks to the members of the Muslim Burial Council who have been working with us to improve the service that we provide to our Muslim communities in the city. And also there's a network of friends groups, Friends of Cemeteries, for instance, who are doing some great work as well. And that we'll be drawing on that as we start to develop our medium to long-term strategy for bereavement services, and Sajila and her team will be leading on that piece of work. This year, we want to continue with our improvement works and our investment in our cemeteries and crematoria. So you've seen we're extending Kings Norton Cemetery. We've recently opened a new Muslim burial section at Quinton, and we're hope to complete the rebuild of Yardley Crematorium by summer of next year. We want to continue with our improvement journey and drive up customer satisfaction with our services. So reviewing the rules and regulations, make sure that they're fit for modern Birmingham, develop some new options, including things like shroud burials, and explore how we can change some of our working practices. So we've got 6-day working at our crematoria and 7-day working at more than one cemetery in the city. The other pressing priority, of course, is addressing the need for a modern mortuary provision within the city. We need a facility that's fit for now and for the future, and which includes digital autopsy technology as well. As we're carrying on that work in the interim, we'll continue to provide that digital autopsy for use by the coroner while we work to deliver that new mortuary in due course. So I think I'll close at that point just to kind of whistle stop of the priorities for the portfolios that touch this committee, but both myself and officers are very happy to take questions on any aspects of the report. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Sajila, do you want to add something?
Thank you, Chair. Just to draw a bit of attention to the report we've already submitted, which shows that we are making real progress now in developing those bereavement improvements that we've been hoping for. We've opened a new Muslim section at Quinton for short-term burials. We have provided evening burials now at such a new hall. We have commenced looking for a site for our new mortuary, which will be fit for the future. So a lot of work is going into this, including working directly with our customer services and IT team to map the customer journey for bereaved families so that they know which bits of the council they can access to ensure that they're getting the most efficient and effective services that they can. So quite a lot of work is going on to move us into a future operating model.
Thank you, Sajila. Councillor Harmer.
Okay, thank you very much for the report. There's a few things. First of all, can I welcome the statement about increasing the number of redeployable CCTV cameras, both to target crime and antisocial behaviour. However, I do have concerns about the policy by which they are deployed. I think that's best picked up on the next report because that goes into that in a bit more detail. So I'll hold my comments on that for then. On modern slavery, it would just be interesting to know what types of areas of work are most prone to modern slavery. and whether there is a trend, what sort of trends there are in that. Because I think, I mean, I went to the original training on it about 3 years ago. Tally Ho. And it was quite revealing in terms of that. But I'm sure it's quite a dynamic situation, so it would be interesting to know what areas are the most prone to it. On local partnership delivery groups, what we've done across Acox Green and Tyseley and Hay Mills wards, Acox Green's a 2-member ward, Tyseley and Hay Mills a 1-member ward, but those 2 wards roughly map the Acox Green neighbourhood police team because of the boundary changes. And we have 6 weekly, the 3 councillors have 6 weekly meetings with our neighbourhood sergeant. We have got to the conclusion that actually that led to us acting as a go-between between housing antisocial behaviour and the police, which was somewhat frustrating to us partly. So we did get agreement and actual attendance of 2 of our senior housing managers to the meeting for this week, and then unfortunately the sergeant wasn't available. So this is a nature. I do think while that was frustrating, we will get that on track for January. I do think it illustrates that there is, in terms of getting the most value out of those meetings, there is a balance between the size of area, because the bigger area you get, the more gender items are less relevant to you. The smaller area, you get to a point where people won't attend. And I think a 2-member ward and a 1-member ward together is sort of feels like the right sort of scale for the really nitty-gritty day-to-day issues. But obviously, it will play differently in different areas by the very nature of this. And finally, on register office, could we have an update on the length of the waiting list for birth registrations at the moment?
Thank you. Mr. Harmer. Remember to respond.
Yeah, sure. So I think we'll pick up the CCTV one under the next report. I'm going to bring in some officer colleagues on this. So on the modern slavery one, Pam, have you got some detail on trends?
So the trends, the biggest percentage is modern slavery, the criminal activity. So that could be co-opting people into stealing, shoplifting, and that criminal activity. So that's by far the largest, and we're talking sort of over 50-60% of the contribution towards modern slavery. Next is domestic. So again, that's people being coerced into people's homes to be domestic servants, for want of a better word, in their own homes. And then it drops down to sexual, and then the exploitation, the labour, drops into the lowest part. So that's the sort of breakdown. What I can do, if it's okay with you, Chair, is I can provide that breakdown of what it currently looks like in Birmingham and provide it as feedback. But those are the sort of average figures, but I can give you a more accurate percentage breakdown for Birmingham through the Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Then on the issue of the LPDGs, and I mean, this is something we've talked previously about, and I've never been entirely convinced that the model is as optimal as it could be. And I think partly because of that issue of scale. So you're quite right. Sometimes the footprint is so big that the ability to look at those kind of hyper-local issues gets crowded out. So this is one of the reasons why at the moment that we're looking as part of our wider governance review and community safety partnership around revisiting what that LPDG model looks like. Bakar and Matt may wish to add to this as well. But one of the things for me has always been around ensuring that we've got the maximum opportunity for elected members to engage in that, which we haven't necessarily had with the model as it stands at the moment, and also getting them involved in the right conversations at the right level. Because talking about something that's happening right at the other end of East Birmingham won't be of interest necessarily to you in Acox Green, but the frustration of not being able to have that Acox Green specific conversation. I think the other dimension to this that causes some issues is obviously that the police geography and our geography no longer is coterminous. I mean, Marge and I have a situation in our ward where we've now got a relation with 3 separate policing teams rather than 1. And this is something else that we've got to try and pick up as we recast that. But Matt or Bakar, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll come in first, and I'm sure Matt will add to it. So scale is the biggest issue for us. We've got 6 LPDGs. The city centre has its own problems. So we have one specific for the city centre, and then we've got 5 to essentially cover all of our constituencies. So each LPDG covers 2 constituencies, and that's because of the resource implications that we have with it. We've also had consistency-related issues across the LPDGs, because I think locally there's probably different expectations as to what the LPDG does and what it doesn't do, and that can sometimes lead to certain services potentially attending some LPDGs and maybe not attending others. So we've been really clear as part of our governance review that we've got to refocus the LPDGs back on community safety matters, and that would make it a lot simpler and easier for colleagues within housing who are dealing with ASB and others to recognise the input that they make within the LPDGs to kind of strengthen that a little bit. And that might even be, a consultation with yourselves and others about changing the name. So rather than them being local partnership delivery groups, for them to be local community safety partnerships. So they do what they essentially say on the tin. Now there are 2 components to that within the LPDG. One is a people focus. So when we've got issues locally around vulnerable individuals, and we need services to come together around a people focus. Sometimes a lot of the information relayed within those settings is very, very sensitive. At the moment, we're trying to run the meetings both with a people and a place angle, and there's even conversations potentially as to separating those 2 out, so that we're clear that a section of the meeting wholly on the place focus, so it doesn't cause confusion amongst partners either, because there'll be some partners that are more relevant to the people aspect of the meeting, and there'll be other partners more relevant to the place aspect of the meeting. I think geography is a challenge for us all, because I think even with the local authority, I think that the geography we use within the LPDGs, there's a different geography utilised with adult social care colleagues. There's a different geography used by housing providers and housing colleagues. So to make it work for us is something that I think from an LPDG perspective, by saying this is solely focused on community safety, we're hoping that those other services that have that space and have that priority around safer communities will then recognise the value and the input coming in. We're currently in discussions with housing colleagues, not just on the LPDG and their place aspect of it, but also how we get to a single integrated ASB offer as well around intervention. The LPDGs provide that overarching support for those, where we're trying to gather evidence for PSPOs, where we're trying to problem solve with partners around specific and particular complex issues of ASB. We're able to do that problem solving approach together collectively, not just internally as BCC, but with our partners within the police. I won't go into the kind of police boundary stuff, but I know that there is some level of consistency that I think we're trying to build now, recognising that we've got some challenges with boundaries, and recognising that some LPGGs, to give you an example, the Hagley Road, we've got a lot of issues around exempt, we've got a lot of issues around ASB, and it kind of transcends 2 LPDGs, but then 1 policing team. So then how do you get that policing team and the 2 LPDGs working together as well? So it's an issue where we've got boundaries that we are working through with police colleagues.
Thank you. So I would commend and support Bakar's assessment of the LPDGs. I think there is unequivocally a need for a local community safety punch. Again, I think there is something about a change of name that actually explains to the people what it is that they're there for. So, I think that is part and parcel of the review. There is then something that says, how do you then tap into those the local issues? and resolve those? And how do you raise those without it deflecting away from the clear role that a local community safety partnership would want to be examining? And this is where I think the relationship between my teams, local councillors, and the work that we're doing with the City Council in terms of their locality-based work really comes into play. So the appointment of neighbourhood coordinators, locality-based enforcement teams, my neighbourhood teams together with local councillors, for me, shows a way forward in terms of how to raise and then problem solve those local issues without it deflecting away from the issues that the LCS, the local community safety partnerships, or whatever they end up being called, should be examined. So then I'll just talk a little bit about the coterminous piece. So again, support WACA's perception. There is never going to be one solution that fulfills every criteria. So if you look at the perspective of health, they have, a different setup, different coterminous to policing, to the City Council, to the electoral wards. I do think there is something in terms of an opportunity with probably what is going to be a refresh of the policing model of West Midlands Police under the new Chief Constable to come in, that gives us an opportunity to review those. And I know that will be considered.
Okay. Secretary, do you want to on the Register Office?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact details in terms of the waiting times for the moment, but what I can tell you is that during October, we registered 450 births a week, approximately. So in total, we registered 1,687 in October. We now increased that in November to 520 a week, and we registered 2,169 in November. Obviously, the requirement is that first registered 2 days, so we are catching up in terms of the locality. And I'll obviously tell members and email members with the details about exact waiting times as of now. The positive news is we're in a trajectory of registering more births per week than we were 6 months ago.
Thank you.
Get those figures shared around
Yes.
after the meeting today.
Thank you. Councillor Bryden?
Yeah, just a point on the LPDGs. I mean, I think the Sutton one seems to work because it's sort of Sutton and Erdington, which, that somehow that does seem to work. But with all the rest, I mean, I've been on the East Birmingham one. I didn't find it at all useful. It did never talk about my local area. So there was no point really in me being on it. And then we had this reduction, didn't we? Where only 3 councillors were allowed to sit on each LPDG. I think, the more important thing is the relationship that you can have with the community safety people around as a local councillor, and there just isn't one, basically. And I think that's the problem. I notice in the report that we're coming on to, it mentioned Big Farm and Tart Cross, which is my ward. And I mean, I have no idea what that was about because I've had no communication. I think that's one of the things about the LPDGs, that if there are local issues that councillors might be able to assist with, there's no communication back to us about what's happening in relation to our ward on that LPDG. There's just no contact. So I'm glad you're thinking it through. I don't know, there must be other areas, obviously, presumably have community safety work going on. There must be other areas. Are there other areas that we can look at to give us a clue about how the hell you do it in a big place like Birmingham, Manchester, or wherever? I'd be interested to know. Councillor Cotton might know something about that. And then the other thing I was going to say, but I suppose coming on to it really with the other report, was that I think as part of some localisation work that some of us are involved in here, we asked about the community safety aspect of the work in the council, because nobody really seems to know very much about it or has anything to do with it. And we were told in writing the community safety redesign will increase capacity to have local intervention officers. Budget constraints will not allow to have full ward level presence. However, a more localised offer is being looked at to provide a more localised service. LPG is also being reviewed to better reflect and improve local input. So I think a lot of councillors would say the same as me, and the people who are interested in localising more, that we do need to look at that, because that's how that's how things work, isn't it? And if you're not doing that, then I wonder what you are doing. There's lots of stuff in the report, but what's actually happening on the ground? Okay. So, any news about the other local authorities and how they tackle it?
I mean, I think there's a limit to how much you can draw from other local authorities because of the size of Birmingham's footprint. Because if you think about, you take Manchester as an example. Manchester's footprint as a city council is quite small when you compare it to Birmingham's. So, we're now covering an area that would also include Trafford and, various other bits of that greater Manchester firmament. So that's always my sort of note of caution. That's not saying that we can't learn things from other areas, but I think we need to bear that in mind. I'm absolutely in the same place that you are around the importance of rebuilding local capacity. And one of my missions since I came into this role has been to try and get us back into that space. I do remember the days of when we had, quite a lot of capacity that has been taken out over a number of years. And so we had effectively got to a point where the community safety team and partnership was almost entirely reliant on external funding, largely from the PCC's office and others. And we've now been trying to put some of our own capacity back in to rebuild exactly the kind of stuff that you're talking about. And I might ask Raka at this point just to talk through some of the thinking about where we're trying to take this over the coming year. But absolutely, we need that local capacity, because otherwise there is a lack of transfer of knowledge and a lack of just people on the ground being able to do stuff that makes that difference. But
certainly. And I think in your next set of localization conversations, you'll probably see some greater detail about what we're trying to do within community safety. I think where we are with that is that we've identified the additional capacity we need beyond just the LPDG managers, because they manage the LPDG meeting and the work of the partners, but they don't necessarily go out and do the intervention and the enforcement. There's consistency issues that we need to develop with the LPDGs. The other key thing for us is presence on the ground, so that our communities can feel that they've got people that they can speak to around community safety issues and they can resolve issues. And similar to what we've got within the city centre. So we've got city centre intervention officers who are either responding at the scene right at the start. We had recently a case where we had a stabbing within the city centre and they were first on the scene, and they provided life-saving support to the individual, and they help deal with the mechanisms around support for vulnerable individuals. So they'll know the individuals within the patch, and they'll know how to provide support or signpost them. We want to be able to replicate that across the city so that we have additional support where we've got issues around antisocial behaviour that has been prevalent for a long time. How do we resolve that? How do we work that through? And this complements the work of the neighbourhood action coordinators that Matt was referring to. So locally, where we've got neighbourhood action coordinators who are there to engage, consult with communities, understand what the issues are, what the problems are, identify those priorities, and then have a service like community safety, like waste and others to say, we need you now to help resolve these issues so that we can bring the services together. So there's a proper locality offer. It's one of the offers that we had many years ago that we've actually stripped away, but we're now trying to rebuild. Within that offer will be the engagement, obviously, with Matt's teams in terms of neighbourhood sergeants. So everybody knows who's doing what locally, and that you have a person who you can engage with, who is able to signpost the right services and for them to be responsive. The community safety partnerships or the local community safety partnerships should therefore once we've got the resourcing finalised for this, which we're hopeful of in the next few months that we will. But once we've got the resourcing finalised, they should have access to their own street intervention officers that will be then deployed as and where they are required, and will be the visibility for community safety teams on the ground. They will be engaged with the local sergeants. They will be engaged with the neighbourhood action coordinators, and similar to when you have fly tipping related issues and you have people coming in, these officers will be there to help problem solve on the community safety related issues as well.
Thank you, Waka.
Can I just say on that then, would it be possible to hear at some point in the near future exactly what this is going to mean, this kind of shake-up that you're doing? Could you come back and tell us something when that's possible? That's Idris.
More than happy to
So that we can see, how it's going to work. I think there may need to be a session with all members at some point.
We've recruited 3 intervention officers who are due to start in January, and we're going to deploy them in the areas where we've got quite a lot of ASB related issues, and it might give us a 3 to 4 month, I suppose, pilot for us to operate ahead of the other officers joining, that we can come back and report on impact and effectiveness of that. I'm sure we can do that within a few months, so happy to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Goodwin?
Yeah, I think some of this has been picked up and perhaps answered partially, but there's 2 things I just wanted to highlight. First is I think about councillors being a bit more engaged in this process. So going back to the summer in Castle Vale, there was a whole host of gang-related activity, real bad gang-related activity, and I wasn't engaged, or I heard, and the words I heard that came out of the LPG as well, some of this is confidential information and can't share that. But actually, if somebody would come to talk to me, I probably could have added plenty more to the discussion until you might want to go and talk to these people, because you might get closer to what's going on here. But because I'm told this is confidential information, actually, someone got lost in all of that, and you may have prevented further gang-related activity and a whole host of other things, because I'm sure lots of other councillors are the same. They get the ears to the ground in their wards and their communities, and they get to hear things which are really vital information, especially when there's something really important going on. It's not about grassing or whatever, but it is about where somebody gets stabbed and nearly loses their life, actually working with the community and acting as that conduit to the services to ensure these sort of things stops. And that's really, really important. So whatever you design next, even if that's only like a monthly briefing, or you engage with your ward councillor through that period of the investigation or whatever it is, not keeping them at arm's length, I think there's some value to that. The thing I would say is importance to communities in all of this, because, and I can only speak from what has gone on in Castle Vale and the response that has happened. There has been a remarkable response in Castle Vale to what had happened over the summer, to the point that individuals had done fundraising, and one young lady, for a different reason, had fundraised for defibrillators to be put across Castle Vale. But alongside of that, she said to me, why don't I just raise a bit of extra money, put some bleed control kits in these defibrillators, then we can get some training put in place for people. So if there ever was a stabbing, it might be the difference between somebody tragically losing their life or not. And I think we need to do something about recognising our communities and what they do. Because actually that young lady was remarkable, because she put a bleed control kit, she's going into the defibrillator unit, and if there's ever another stabbing and the training that's happened, it could be the difference between life and death. So I just think there's something about recognising the value of our communities, because actually sometimes they have solutions to our problems as well. And I think that's really, really important. I don't quite know what the actual answer is, but I do know from what I've seen in Castle Vale, and some of the things where we held a community safety summit on the back of what happened, there was a lot of people wanting to actually have positive solutions rather than negative solutions. And we want to be part of a solution that says we're part of our community and we want to make sure our community is safe. And that was in a positive way. And the young lady who got the control kit to put the defibrillator is just one good example of somebody trying to do something positive for our communities. But all that hinges on actually engagement with people like me, so I can assure the communities about what's going on and actually can feed back to what the communities are saying as well. Because by and large, when we have a community safety meeting, we had 70 people in a small room, 2,000 people watching it via Facebook Live. So the appetite for being engaged is absolutely there. I just want us to make sure we exploit that properly in the right, best way, which, you know, makes our communities front and centre. Because nobody wants, if you talk to anybody, I'm sure everybody will say the same, nobody wants gang violence in their communities. And the sort of gang violence that we'd seen in Castle last year, nobody definitely wants that. And actually our communities are part of that solution. But also they come to me discreetly and say, I've got this. So just as an ask, I hope it doesn't happen again, but if it was, make sure councillors are involved in some way, and rather they kind of, it's confidential and can't talk about it, because actually it's confidential, yes, and then actually undertaking that I don't repeat what's being said to me, rather, and dealing with that information in a professional way. That means that I don't tell the communities what I'm knowing, but I'm also feeling that what the communities are feeling as well at the same time.
I think you're absolutely right. And we have a statutory responsibility to consult and engage as part of the requirements that we have for community safety. Frankly, we haven't done it as good as we should have done, or as effectively as we should have done. And that's why, as part of the redesign that the Community Safety Partnership Board has asked for us to do, that consult and engage will be revisited, not just from a city-wide perspective in terms of the wider Community Safety Partnership Board, but how it also embeds itself within the local community safety partnership structure as well, and how we engage better, not just with yourselves, but with also communities on the ground as well. So it is a big priority for us, and not least because it's also a statutory responsibility that we should be scrutinising on a regular basis. So yeah, absolutely welcome everything that you've said, and we are aware that we've got challenges in this space.
I think also there's a piece here. It's not just about the reactive stuff when incidents have happened. It's about using your know-how, the community's know-how, to do that preventative stuff as well. So that kind of horizon scanning, knowing where there are issues and challenges, and being able to use that information in a way that prevents things happening as also. Sorry, Martin.
No, just one thing on the back of what you were saying. I was listening intently and that, sort of reflecting on our approach. So one of the things I think we have significantly improved is what we call our consequence management meetings to serious issues of disorder, violence, firearm discharges, etc. And I think the fact that we've gone from a place where that was very internally focused within policing to the point now where we bring partners on board, including community safety, women and children's trust, social care, whoever is relevant to the individual. I do think on the back of it, there was something that we should be looking at, which is community safety partnership. You have now been informed of this. They are bound by confidentiality, but part and parcel of it, we should be saying to them, and this is the information that you should be providing to other trusted partners, including the councils and others. So I do think there is a little bit that I've just reflected on that is missing from that process. I think I'm going to take that back.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, can I quickly ask about the cemetery section for the Muslim burials? Is it still in the process of development, or has the burials started happening? And secondly, regarding the Sutton Coalfield cemetery, going back a few 7-8 years ago, a lot of bodies were being taken to Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and since then, and particularly after COVID, majority of the burials are happening in here. So a lot of questions being asked to us elected members from the community, saying that the lifespan of the Sutton cemetery, because it may have been anticipated X, Y years, but because now more burials are happening here. So what is the expected lifespan of that cemetery?
Thank you. Chair. In terms of Quinton, we started short notice burials for Muslim communities there in September. So that has been running for some period of time now. In terms of new hall, you're quite right that our space is filling up quicker than we had anticipated, but we have got extension projects in train at a number of cemeteries, and we're going to bring those forward to deal with the increased demand. So we are aware of that, and we are already starting our planning and bringing it forward. I also have some extra data on Councillor Harmer's question as well.
And in terms of mortuary development, what is the time scale for that?
Obviously, finding a new site for the mortuary and building a new site for the mortuary is going to be a very extensive piece of work. So, although we're in the project planning stage in terms of looking for a project manager, and we've also commenced looking for sites, this could be anything of 2 to 3 years. I have to be completely honest. I couldn't foresee it happening any quicker than that time frame, because it is so exceptional what we want to build, and we also want to build, a centre of excellence as well. We want a modern mortuary that's fit for our population, our diverse communities, that can provide the best for us.
We had originally explored, predating my time in this portfolio and Sir Julia's time in that role, we had originally wanted to try and do something on a regional basis in partnership with other authorities, but unfortunately that wasn't able to make that stack up. So hence the fact that we're now looking at other options. But in short, we absolutely need a modern mortuary provision in this city. So delivering that is a non-negotiable for us.
Thank you.
So Julia, did you want to come back on those figures?
Councillor Harmer. So I have got the figures, and they're not as positive as I would like to think, but the time frame for births at the moment, well, time frame, as you know, is 42 days to register a birth. And if they apply today and book themselves online, the next available appointment is February the 23rd. However, we open extra diaries weekly, depending on staff availability. And if they email us and call us because for some reason that time frame would cause some issues, for instance, in claiming benefits, then we will make capacity within the new diaries that we open weekly to bring forward people depending upon their urgent need to be registered. There is no penalty to the individual person if they register after 42 days. So we listen to people's personal circumstances and basically make capacity to ensure that it isn't detrimental to them to wait that long. But online bookings are now running to February.
Should I just express concern about that, because I would have hoped that it would have come down by more than that. I mean, the point is that you can't claim child benefit until your birth has been registered. And yeah, it's great that those people that ask for it will be found an earlier slot, but not everybody will. And we know that, getting on to half the children in this city are in child poverty, and you clearly can't offer early slots for half the births, otherwise because the system wouldn't work that way. So I suspect quite a lot of people who do badly need that child benefit are having to wait significantly longer than they would if the 42-day target was being met. So, and the other thing to say is that, one of the results of the pandemic is the birth rate has dropped significantly. We're nothing like the birth rate that we had 10 years ago. So we ought to be able to catch up. So if we could keep that under close scrutiny, please.
Look, to you, Councillor, we're not aware at the moment of any cases the registration of the birth that's impacted on people's ability to claim benefits. We are particularly very, very aware of the need to address those issues for those people who need to claim benefits, and hence the pathway to obtain a registration for 42 days. We do open extra diaries every week where we have capacity of the staff to be able to do that. We recognise that this is not the position we want to be in. We have spoken before about the vacancies that we have in registration services, and also issues with an ageing workforce, potentially illness issues. And in the new year, where we're working with occupational health to do a proactive pilot within registration services, where people staff who are absent get an early intervention by occupational health to assist them in returning to work sooner. So we do recognise that that we need to make adjustments and make improvements, and we are very focused on that, Councillor Harmer.
And in addition to that, I'll ensure from my perspective that we are not operating in a way that does cause problems for people because of any delays around birth registrations. I think we've got to be really mindful of that, particularly around access to benefits at the current time. So we'll keep that under review as well, Roger.
Thank you. Can we note the report and any comments following the report? Is it noted? Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next item, which is number 6, and it's Birmingham Community Safety Partnership Annual Report. And again, we've got Councillor John Carton as Chair of Birmingham Community Safety Partnership, and we've got Wakar Ahmed, Assistant Director, Community Safety and Resilience, and again, Pam Poy, Senior Service Manager, Community Safety Team, and finally, Chief Superintendent Matt Shahid, Vice Chair of Birmingham Community Partnership. So, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. My second act this afternoon. So I won't say too much by way of introduction, because I think the detail is in the questions around the report. But just to say, the Community Safety Partnership is very much a partnership endeavour. We host the partnership as the City Council. Obviously, I act as the chair, but it's the role that others play in this as well. So that's the police, fire services, health, probation, housing, voluntary community sector also play a key role in that. As you referred, Chief Superintendent Chair was the Vice Chair. He took over from Steve Graham, who many of you may remember came to previous committees to report on the work of the partnership. What we've got in this report, it sets out the extensive range of projects, initiatives, activities that the partnership has either funded, facilitated or participated in over the last year. Again, we try to focus on two things I referenced in the earlier discussion. One, ensuring that we've got the services and support in place so we can respond effectively and when incidents arise, and ensure that victims get help and that there is justice delivered for people in those circumstances, but also to try and prevent crime and antisocial behaviour happening in the first place. So if you look at a number of the initiatives in this report, whether that's the work that we do around injunctions and PSPOs, whether it's the initiatives like virtual decisions, helping young people understand the consequences of their potential actions, things like the Re-Engage project, the modern slavery interventions we talked about earlier, the work around DA, all of this is around how we try and get into that preventative early intervention space. Section 4 of the report sets out some of the current statistics around the profile of crime within the city. The partnership keeps a very close watch on data. It's a standing item on all of our meeting agendas because that's absolutely key to informing what our strategy looks like and informs our commissioning decisions as well. As you'll see in Section 4, there's a reduction in violence-related offences compared to last year. I think that's welcome, but that's certainly no grounds for any complacency whatsoever, particularly when you look at the statistics around knife crime, which remains a very real concern. So I think that underlines the importance of sustaining some of the interventions that are set out in this report. And it's also evident that acquisitive crime is rising as well. That is perhaps no surprise given the economic climate, but again, something that we need to be very much engaged with in the coming year. And we'll be using that data to drive and shape our response and our investment decisions over the course of this year as well. The other thing that's really important here, and we've touched on this in the previous discussion, is making sure that we're set up in the most effective way to meet the challenges that are facing the city. So we take some time to review our structures and the work programme, and that's detailed in Section 5 of the report. That includes reviewing the work that we're doing and how we respond to locality issues. Again, we touched on that in the previous discussion as well. So that's just to give you a sort of brief overview of what's contained within the 20 pages of the report here. But again, very happy to take questions, have a wider discussion around the issues contained therein. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Rafa, you want to add anything?
I mean, I think that I think Councillor Cotton has covered it. I think the one other thing that I'd probably add are the partnership and the relationships with the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Violence Reduction Partnership, which are absolutely key to some of the work that we do and drive some of the activity that may seem that it's council-led activity, but it's actually partnership-led activity. So we do work with our violence board. So where you've seen the redesigning of the structure here, there are regional partnerships that we're also contributing to as well, and that Birmingham is also benefiting from, whilst at the same time providing support to other areas as well.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Palmer?
Yeah, okay. First point is actually about supported exempt accommodation. And actually, it's a forward-looking point. I mean, we all know that the sector is dysfunctional, to put it politely, but that we are hopefully going to get in the legislation, bill going through Parliament. And when that happens, and when we get hopefully a properly regulated sector, the providers, or the providers that survive good regulation, should we say, ought to be important partners in this, because they are supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our society, people who've been victims of crime, people who are past offenders, and people who have abuse issues. So they ought to be really tightly involved in these structures. So looking forward to a more functional exempt structure, hopefully thoughts will be put to how that happens. The second point I wanted to make, as I said before, was about redeployable CCTV. So the first report said that we're increasing the number. This report says that we currently have access to 11 redeployable cameras. So is that the number before the increase, or is it going to be increased to a higher number? So how many? But I really wanted just to pick up on the process. 3.10 talks about a process is now in place. So it's clearly a new process that's been thought about and developed, and it's now being put in place to deploy the CCTV. And this is my experience of that process. The largest green space in my ward of Foxhollis Park is an extremely valuable resource to the community, but one that's often suffered a lot of antisocial behaviour over many, many years. We have managed to get a significant amount of funding to improve the play areas in the park as a result of loss of open space elsewhere nearby. The developer had to make contributions well over £500,000. And work started on that a short time ago. Pretty well as soon as the work started, it suffered a lot of vandalism, to the extent that the contractor had to hire a private security guard to protect the site. And in one instance, the private security guard had to retreat into a secure area because he feared for his safety. So that's the sort of level of issue there. In the car park where next to where this is taking place, by coincidence, there are CCTV poles installed previously. So great, I think. I put a request into the Community Safety Partnership. Please, could we have some redeployable CCTV cameras on these poles? Because A, there's a large amount of ASB. B, we're actually being told by parks that we may not actually be able to deliver the work because of the amount of resource needed to protect the work that's being done. So we're talking about certainly well into 5 figures cost to direct cost to the community of this, plus all the other costs. This is the answer I got. I must point out that any CCTV will only be installed after a decision from the chair, LPDG. A rigorous process of consultation, review and resilience will follow. In brackets, I anticipate the whole process, if agreed, will take approximately 2 to 3 months. Well, that's an utterly dysfunctional process that is not fit for purpose. And as you can probably tell, I'm quite angry about it. So could we look again at what that process that is now in place, please?
Absolutely. I'm not hearing what you're saying and the way you're describing that response. Clearly, there are things that we need to be doing a lot better. The whole point and purpose of having a redeployable CCTV offer is to make sure that we can get in quickly, we can have a process that is efficient, and that the community safety or the local community safety partnership groups aren't necessarily making decisions, but are considering all the evidence with all the partners, and then are putting forward your case into the process, because we have to follow certain legislative processes. They shouldn't be taking 3 months. Part of the cost around the 3 months might be either an identification of resource, and I'll look into that particular issue for you personally. Part of it might be access to the cameras if they're already redeployed, or a resource request if we need more. However, having said that, I think there is some mileage in us understanding how you see the process as opposed to how we set a process, because if the process isn't feeling right locally and it isn't leading to quick interventions, then there's something for us to kind of think about, take away, and then review. If it's a delay because there are legal implications for us around consultation, etc., then we need to be absolutely clear about those, so that you can see that, as opposed to an email that says it's probably going to take X amount of resource. On the redeployable cameras, one of the things that we're really keen on doing and trying to understand is the type of cameras that we're able to purchase that don't require the poles, that we're able to move around very, very quickly, because I think there is now new technology available for us, and we're working with IT and digital to try and see whether we can swap or change some of the cameras available to us that can be deployed quickly, and that can actually do more of the monitoring that we need. Because I think the other thing around CCTV is making sure that the cameras themselves are responsive. And if it's not the cameras, the operators that are looking at the data are responsive and very quickly, so you get feedback to once they're put in place. I think on the process, I think we probably we'll revisit that campaign, because I think the response you've got doesn't feel like the process as I've read it. And as I've seen it, and it shouldn't really be taking that long.
Yeah, it is a lengthy time. Whether it's the 2 months is something I need to understand in relation to that particular. We've got one officer that covers an LPDG area. We've got one officer. That one officer facilitates the LPDG and all of the things that happen in there. So if you want a PSPO, you want your camera, they have the responsibility for that as well. So I have to understand if that was a resource issue with them. Part of the process, and to make sure we've got a passport to compliances, there is quite a rigorous application form that has to be completed so that we meet all the legislation requirements. And as part of that, we also have to do a consultation within the area. And that consultation alone, we have to allow a time period of approximately 2 weeks where residents can respond to that consultation. So there are reasons why it takes a certain period of time. What I can do is, rather than have a response like that sent to you, we can break it down on what the timescale looks like, and part of the reason it might take the length of time that you've been quoted there.
But I think, notwithstanding that we know that there are legal hurdles we have to clear on deployment of CCTV, given the circumstances that you've described there and the very serious nature of what was taking place, I don't think that's an acceptable response in those circumstances. So we'll take that away and look at that specific incident and also what it means for the wider policy. And if you can copy me into what you sent through to Waka Roger, we'll make sure that's addressed. Thank you.
Councillor Bride.
Well, on the CCTV process issue, I mean, my experience has been, I think it was unclear, fly tipping camera, but it took months and months, my colleague will know about this, months and months and months to get this camera installed, because of so many different hurdles that the process insisted it went through. And then it got stuck in legal services. Does yours have to go to legal services? No.
Yeah, so I think the point that you're describing is one of the issues that we've been working very closely with Darren Chair and the team around the fly tipping cameras, because they go through slightly different processes because there's different legislation required. But what we're trying to do within the council is make sure that all of our CCTV requests are part of one single process, so that whilst we recognise that the consultation might be different, the way that we identify and look for cameras and then place cameras should go through a single process, which is why I think in the process that you've got within the map where an LPDG will ultimately kind of look at the request and put it through, and then we'll have the resilience team to look at it. It's because we're bringing all the compliance around CCTV into one place so that we're not having different responses back, and that it's actually more consistent. But they are slightly different. And one of the things that I'm keen to recognise is where we've got CCTV cameras, can we use them for both fly tipping and ASB? Because sometimes that's not available because of the legislation for it. So it's whether a joint consultation needs to be done, where you've got both an antisocial behaviour related issue as well as a fly tipping issue, and therefore can a single request for a CCTV camera in that space be feasible? Because as it stands at the moment, there are requests for CCTV that are ASB related that can only be used for ASB because of the surveillance code, and then there are requests for fly tipping that can only be used for fly tipping and not necessarily ASB.
Well, I think the issue of how long it takes needs sorting, as Councillor Cotton said. But I also think the issue of communication, because in my case, I have not a clue who was leading on it. So you just do not know how to get the information about where it's got to in the process. I don't know whether that's similar with the community safety cameras, but it was absolutely, the communication was hopeless. Didn't know who to go to. The other point I was going to ask about was in 3.12, you talk about this locality working. How's that actually going to work? Is this going to involve community safety people, or is this just the neighbourhood action coordinators who are appointed now under this localisation stuff that they're doing? Is it just going to involve them? And I see that Pioneer Housing Group are being pulled into this as well. Just be interested to know exactly what that's all about, and is that a kind of scenario that could be repeated elsewhere if it was successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably ask Matt to join in, because there's some conversations that we've had jointly with police colleagues around, I suppose, the lack of coordination locally to effectively deal with the issues that you're raising. So the neighbourhood action coordinators who sit within the neighbourhoods directorate that Chris Jordan has responsibility for, the reason we brought the neighbourhood action coordinators in was to resolve the issues and the problems around the lack of a neighbourhood tasking type framework for them to be able to coordinate a range of issues. Now, in order for them to be as effective as they can be, they need access to services like community safety and environment and regulatory enforcement to have the offer ready to respond to the needs of the citizens. So what we're trying to build out around the neighbourhood action coordinators is that services like community safety have a responsive on the ground response through an intervention officer that can then do the enforcement that can actually come out, be visible, be that kind of community safety lead, similar to what you might have around the fly tipping colleagues and others as well. Can it grow out? I think the initial feedback that we've had with the neighbourhood action coordinators, in the absence of a community safety intervention officer, I may say, because we haven't yet moved into that space, has been really, really positive. And it's been identified that we do need those community intervention officers to be able to do some of the enforcement, and where the police can't enforce, where the local authority needs to come in and enforce. So what we are trying to do here is, as part of that pilot, as it's rolling out, is the new officers that we've got coming into play. It's 3 community safety officers in the minute whilst we wait for the broader redesign. They will be assigned to those areas, working closely with the neighbourhood action coordinators, so that their ability to deal with not just fly tipping or graffiti, but also the complex ASB or the place-based ASB that exists within an area is strengthened and enhanced, so that one person isn't necessarily responsible for everything, but is a conduit for you to say, actually, we don't want to keep going to person X and then person Z. You've got one person who then has all of the links across, and it's those services that are then responding to that as well. So it may not be exactly the same as the old neighbourhood tasking framework that we had some years back, but I think we will get to a place where it's beginning to make a difference locally. I think the police may have a view on this as well, and we're hoping that as we move into 2023, we'll be able to enhance that in more localities across the city as well. Don't know if there's...
So, for me, it's utterly palpable that there is that deficit of locality-based cooperation, coordination. on this frame. And I've been working very closely with WACR, Councillor Cotton and others to really push this agenda forward, because effectively what you have is you have my frontline officers in terms of the neighbourhood teams, and you have some other sort of partners in and around that sphere. And then trying to access anything to come in and help problem solve, it is a real challenge to navigate the bureaucracy. And you need that coordinator to act as that conduit. And then vice versa, you need that coordinator to be able to have the intervention officer to be able to deploy to the issue. So they come part and parcel. So we've been working on this pilot, the two current pilots at the Zells and Sparkle. And the third one, Stockton Green, where Pioneer will come into play. And when I speak to my teams now, and I do on a regular basis, who are working with these individuals, it's been transformation. All of a sudden, things that were taking a time, and I'm sure it's for you, it's a reinvention of the wheel, but it's that they are saying it's transformation, because all of a sudden, the conversations they're now having on a daily basis, as they're working hand in glove with each other, I'm taking down those barriers and sort of demystifying the sort of process. So I'm wholeheartedly in favour of it. It's of it. I have to, like everyone else, sort of bide my time until a point where it's actually in place in more areas. But I think the pilot work has demonstrated the worth of it.
Thanks, Matt. Councillor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the CCTV issue is a really, really important one. On Castle Vale, CCTV, CHK Pioneer Housing have a statewide CCTV. Is a mechanism to kind of put the data sharing agreement in place. So things like fly tipping and some of the issues that you're talking about, access can be given to partners for the reasons that you've been talking about. I'm thinking fly tipping. Castle is really, really good. It's concerned states team, so there's a mechanism there to deal with things like fly tipping really, really quickly. But I'm just very, very conscious that they've got 90 CCTV cameras there. Surely we need to be able to find a way of getting the data sharing agreements in place to have access to them cameras. Because if there are things happening, or even if something happened in Sutton and the person went through Castle Vale, you've got to catch a number of plates, all the rest of it. And I'm just wondering, do we have a data sharing agreement? And if not, how do we do that to help us? Because if somebody's got CCTV cameras, and quite ruthlessly, from I say this, it's at no cost to us, we can have access to them. Surely we need to be doing that. So
I just think the complexity there. I
understand there's data sharing.
Yeah, so I agree with that, but I think the complexity is in the purpose of the camera going in the first place, and the
cameras are already there.
Yeah. So they would have gone in for a particular reason, and the Surveillance Commissioner Code is very particular that when you introduce cameras or CCTV cameras, there has to be very, very specific reasons to do so, and then you can't extend out of those reasons without another consultation for it. And if you remember almost a decade ago now, we had the issues around Project Champion and the surveillance cameras in there. Since the issues around Project Champion, there's been a lot more tightening of the use of CCTV cameras and the consultations required for it. So in principle, I would love to have access to cameras across the city. That gives us greater visibility. But it's not just on the data sharing agreement. The data sharing agreement, even if we did have one in place, we would still have to then revisit the purpose of the camera in the first place, and that might require an additional consultation for us to undertake just to make it legally sound. But I think the point around speaking to other colleagues, we have the data sharing agreements with the police. But
I think there are two things. So I think there are some technical and legalistic issues. But just to give you some reassurance, if my teams are investigating a crime that, as you say, has taken place in Sutton, and we think there's been a connection to Castle Vale, clearly my teams will have the ability and the contact to connect into Castle Vale and obtain CCTV. So just to give you that assurance.
No, thank you. And I guess the follow-up is, could we at least try and explore we might overcome them technicalities?
Yeah.
So I think that'd be
Can I
really cool.
Amelia, you got some suggestion?
Yeah, I was just going to say, separate to your point, Councillor Goodwin, in relation to Castle Vale, but in terms of the redeployable cameras, at next January's overview of the scrutiny committee, the street scene department are going to be coming back to report to you on the inquiry of the flight review, and then we'll be reporting on the 2 separate recommendations. One of them relates to the use of flight tipping cameras. So given there has been a number of questions and clarifications needed around the redeployable cameras for community safety, and there's, I imagine, an inevitable stretching into that territory, and we do have a little bit of capacity in the agenda, whether or not it would be appropriate or timely, whether you'd be able to come back specific, not on the Castle Vale point, but on the redeployable.
I was just going to make a point. It might be worth, as part of the LPDG review. I mean, one of the things that we do, for example, around domestic homicides is we ask for the scrutiny of how timely they are. How timely we are being, what are the delays, just as you, Councillor, have asked around the delay in terms of the births registration. LPDG, in my opinion, should be asking, tell me, we've made a decision in terms of where they're going to be deployed, tell me when they're deployed, and they should be scrutinising that decision. It's part and parcel of that. For me, that should be standard.
I'll just quickly remind the question about the number. Is the 11 before the increase or after it? And secondly, one thing I would suggest is that in this talk about the need to consult the community, I think you would find that in many cases, local councils, local community forums, whatever, would be very willing to do the large amount of that work with the engagement, obviously, of the proper officers, which would help a lot.
I think that's a fair point. In terms of the 11 is what we have available at the moment. The intention is to try and grow that step further. I don't want to put a specific number on that at the moment, Roger, for the reasons that Rocco referred to around technical capacity, but the intention is to grow that. But clearly, we also need to make sure the process for deploying these is correct, so we don't end up in the circumstances that you've outlined this afternoon.
I'm mindful of time. As a committee, is it agreed that we bring the group back next month? Yeah. Thank you. Quickly, before I move on to the next item, 15, 20 years ago, when there were lots of criminal gangs working in Birmingham, and then the good work of police, they were dismantled. But in the last few years, we have seen that they are reorganizing, and particularly violent crime amongst those youngsters is out of proportion. I mean, hardly a week goes by when a youth has been killed by another youth. So what, in your view, quickly, what are the factors behind what has happened in the last few years?
So the factors, the main driver behind gang crime is drugs. So that's the biggest factor that lies behind it. When Pam spoke about the modern slavery referrals, this is criminal exploitation of young people to get involved in county line drug activities. So that's what lays behind it. It lays behind much of the violence. We now have on both sides of the Birmingham policing footprint dedicated organised criminal gang teams. We now have established an urban street gang team to look at those younger people who are emerging towards that sort of higher end. On a daily basis, we are taking action and enforcement action against these individuals. There was a county line drug operation dismantled just yesterday by my teams. That's happening on a daily basis. And now we have what we call serious and organised crime exploitation teams who are looking at those young people who are vulnerable to that exploitation and are targeting deliberately the exploiters, and we're having success there. So we've got a robust approach in place to deal with it.
And I think, Chair, very quickly, we've got the serious violence duty landing shortly. So I think this time next year, it'll be good thing for committee to have a look at the progress of the work that we're doing against the serious violence duty. So that might be a good scrutiny conversation to have at that time.
I can just add, part of the serious violence duty is introducing offensive weapon homicide review. So it's very similar to the domestic homicide review. But what it'll actually do is look at an incident where someone has died as a result of a weapon being used. So there's a pilot taking place in 3 locations across the country, in Birmingham, joining up with Coventry as part of that pilot, and that's due to start in February. So that's an 18-month pilot, so that will give us a real clear insight into exactly the questions that you're asking, because what we'll be doing is reviewing all of those incidents the same way as we review a domestic homicide review, and take some learning from it, and then we will have some recommendations moving forward.
Thanks very much. Can we move on to the next item, which is number 7, work program. And in January meeting, we got further report back on reducing fly tipping inquiry. Outstanding recommendation RO1 and RO3, and we will have officers coming from Rochdale, which will be the 3rd cleanest streets in 4 session. This is for noting, is that noted? And the date of the next meeting is
on the work programme. I think it's February's work meeting. We have the quarterly performance. I have asked in the past that we could have a report on the number of housing ombudsman decisions against the council. So could we look at that? So that there could, in that context, I have been given figures which you might find interesting in terms of the amount of compensation paid by the city council for housing related matters, which show a significant increase, particularly this year. And I would be interesting to have a report have that report with the housing, with the ombudsman figures, but also the actual amount of compensation paid, and some comments from the department as to what the cause of that is, and what might be done about addressing why that's happening. So that's
across the board for all of housing, or just specific parts of things. So, for example,
well, I've got the total figures, yeah, and I'm told it is the increase is largely being driven from a repairs point of view. So that's the interpretation of the finance people. I'd like the housing part of the council to actually, say that that's right or why that's happening. That's part of the corporate contract.
Okay, try to bring that in.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the date of the next meeting is 12th of January 2023. Agenda item 9 is request for call-in / councillor for action / petitions received. No. Next item is other urgent business. And finally, can we agree authority to chair and the officers in between the meetings?
Great.
Thank you very much. Meeting is closed.
Just straight.